10:30 Friday morning, and Celeste has kindly consented to tell us a little bit about her growing up at Taliesin. Celeste was the daughter of Kay and Davy Davison. So why don't you take it from there, Celeste, and tell us more about it.
I was born here in 1948. Kay and Davy were here taking care of the camp for the fellowship to come down. And my parents, Davy came in 1938 and Kay came in 1936. So they'd been here for a while before I arrived. I had an older brother named Tal, who was born in 1942. And I spent all my early years here, and then I went and spent some time in school away from Taliesin, coming back for vacations and things like that.
Well, can you remember things when you were very little? What was your earliest memory?
Probably my earliest memory was getting polio at about 3 3/4. And I remember the apprentices and the architects coming in and giving me hot packs for the condition, which was a treatment at the time for polio. And I remember going, when we were in first grade, I remember going to the school in Wisconsin. It was a little red schoolhouse, one-room schoolhouse with 6 grades in it. And Frances, who was then called Polly Lockhart, Leslie's mom, would bring us hot lunches at lunchtime, to the envy of all the other children. I remember the rights. I especially remember box projects and critiques of the drawings that everybody submitted. I remember being upset as a child because I didn't understand what a critique was, and I just thought that Mr. Wright was bad-mouthing my dad's stuff.
Oh.
And, I just didn't understand what was going on exactly, although as time went by, I could understand. But as a child, it was very difficult to see all this hard work being done and then being just sort of torn asunder, which was, I guess, their learning process, and mine as well.
Well, there is a beautiful picture of you sitting beside Mr. Wright during one of those things. Do you remember what age you were?
I'd say probably I was 3 or 4. And there are several pictures of me sitting at box projects. How I managed to sit still during all that time, I don't know, because I certainly wouldn't ask my son at 6 even to sit through a box project, but there I was.
Well, did you ever say to your parents, well, why is he, saying unkind things about you? I mean, did you ever discuss that with them? And
I don't know. I might have, but I might not have been able to have that opportunity. And I remember my mother taking care of Mrs. Wright. That was very much her job. She was Mrs. Wright's aide, assistant, lady-in-waiting, took care of all of her needs. And it was difficult for the family because it was difficult for her to spend time with us and also spend time with Mrs. Wright. So that caused a little consternation in the family, but I mean, it was life at Taliesin. I mean, you had lots of jobs to do, and the family was one of the things that got taken care of at the end of the day.
Well, where did you live at that time?
Well, we lived in Arizona. We lived where the Rattenberries are now. My mother's still there, which is in the apprentice court. I remember the canvas roofs and everything being open. During the summer, I remember coming back one summer and the thermometer had popped at 120. And the black widow spiders, we had a little outhouse in our apartment. That was before it was all enclosed. So there was a separate apartment and a separate bathroom and a little tiny kitchen. And in Wisconsin, we lived over the bridge. Not over the bridge exactly, but to the... what's
where
that
it's
road
now
called?
Dick Carney's room.
It's now Dick Carney's room,
Yeah,
but we had that apartment for a long time. And it was a nice spot to be in because it was close to the T-circle and it was close to the house, and it was sort of in the center of things.
Did you have a preference as a child between the two
Yes.
places?
I loved Wisconsin, and I still do. I mean, I love the desert, but Wisconsin has always had my heart. The green rolling hills and the freedom. And also, I was here in the summertime, whereas in the winters, I was often away at school, and I would just come at Christmas and Easter. So somebody like Leslie Lockhart was, here really consistently all the way through her life, whereas I have these little gaps.
Oh. Can you tell us exactly? You got the polio at 3 3/4, and then at what point did you go away to school the first time? And
Well, I spent 2 years in the Mayo Clinic, 4, 5, and then at 6 I came back.
you mean actually you stayed there night and day?
Well, yes, most of the time I lived there.
Hmm.
I'd come home occasionally, and my parents would come over for weekends. But I was there a long time, and I had major surgery. So, and then at 6, when I was in the little red schoolhouse, I tripped and broke my leg, and so my parents and Mrs. Wright decided that I should be sent away to boarding school. So I went to Denver, Colorado, for first, second, third grades, maybe fourth. I was 6 years old when I left, and came home for vacations. I remember flying on the plane by myself at 6 years old. It was kind of exciting. And then
Was the leg you broke the same one that had polio?
Mhm.
Mm.
And then I was here for a year or two, and then I went to Hawaii with my mom. My mom went to Hawaii.
What year was it?
Let me think. I went in 1960, and I think she went in just about the year, right around the time Mr. Wright died, 1959. My brother was born in 1958, and then I believe she left sometime in 59 or early 1960, and then I went and joined them in 1960 in Hawaii and spent 3 years in Hawaii. She was married to Steve Oyakawa at the time, who was also an architect here, long standing. And but she had a very hard time being away from Taliesin and Mrs. Wright. She really wanted to come back.
Hmm. Did Steve feel the same? I
No.
guess he didn't.
He really wanted to be independent and just live his own life. And as you know, you can get there's a whole lot of different attitudes here, and some people really get into this life and want to be here for their lifetime people, and other people want to just pass through and do what they can here, and then they go on with their lives. I've seen people come and go in a very short amount of time, as you have, and then I've seen people here as long as our mothers. I don't know how long your mom's been here, but my mom's been here since she was 16, and she's now 75, so
Wow.
it's been a while.
Well, Mother came in 34, but she did leave for a period of 18 years at one point, and then came back. Well, what about other older people here that you remember?
Well, I remember Dick Carney was around a lot when I was a child, and John R. They came and visited me when I was in boarding school. And John A. was here, Arnold. Dory came a little later. The Lockhart family, of course, Ken and Polly and Leslie and Brian were their children, and they were the ones that we played with mostly. And Sean and the Rourke family were here later as we got a little older. I think that the core group of children that I grew up with were Tall and myself and Leslie and Brian Duck. Was there anybody else?
Not until later, I don't think.
I mean, later there were different generations.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I know, we were kind of the first group of kids that grew up here, except for yours. I don't know when you and I came, but
We visited during those times, but didn't come back until later.
yeah.
We were probably gone by the time you were born. Well, what about Wes? What about Jean?
Oh, and Wes and Jean and Shirley were all here, of course. And Svetlana died the year that I was born, so I missed her. but she was my mother's best friend, and then Shirley was my mother's best friend, and she died very early age, and was missed a lot, Shirley Casey.
Well, did you, how did you get along with Tal?
We were, I think, a typical sibling situation in a family that didn't have their act all that well together until we became teenagers. When I was about 16 or 17, he was 6 years older than I was, and at that time we joined together sort of at the hip and became buddies. But before that, it was all, I remember coming back in my wheelchair, and he would take the wheelchair and just tip it back all the way, and I would just fall over. And then I remember him doing things like shaving soap and telling me, "This is candy now, you should eat this." And, you know, it was just typical sibling rivalry that went on. I mean, there was not enough attention filtering down. I mean, there wasn't enough attention, we would go into psychology, but there wasn't enough between the parents for anything to filter down to the children. So we basically ended up taking care of ourselves. And that just didn't work too well, because when you're 2 years old, you don't know how to take care of yourself very well. And by the time we got to playful ages, there was a lot of tenseness. I remember once Tal went into the little kitchen to get some food to feed the dog, and my mom just pulled him out by the hair, beating him up, and going, "You stay out of here, I am busy, I don't have time for this." And I'm screaming at her from the sidelines. I was about 3 or 4 years old, to leave my brother alone. And, you know, it was just, there was a lot of craziness going on. I think that there was a lot of stress and pressure that I now understand as an adult, being here at Taliesin for about a year, that what made certain things intolerable. And it was very difficult. It is difficult to be a parent here at Taliesin, because you just got so many things to do, and it's hard to devote any kind of energy to child rearing. People are changing that now, because they're just taking the time to do it, and the rights aren't here anymore. But at the time, there was just an unbearable amount of pressure, and I can see how that affected my parents in retrospect. But at the time, I was very angry and upset that they treated us with such, it seemed like malice. It wasn't really malice, but it was just a big pressure cooker.
Well, what about, did you think that any of the other children got perhaps better treatment?
Yes, I felt that Leslie and Brian had a better family life. It turns out probably that they actually might not have. I mean, I think all families are pretty dysfunctional, but they had a little more normality, because Mrs. Wright, Frances had her own family life that she kept sacred, away from not away from Taliesin, but that Taliesin did not interfere with for her. She was able to maintain that, and she, not being so attached to the rights, was able to do her thing and be able to go home and be with family. So I thought Leslie really had it made, and that Brian really had it made, and I was very close to them. And but again, in retrospect, you can look back and say, well, on the other hand, I had these parents that had amazing talents. My mother is still a very good artist, and my father was excellent at doing the night renderings and his touch with architecture. And he had, when he took the time, he was very tender and sweet, and he had a great sense of humor.
Would he read stories to you, or things?
Gee, somebody read stories to me. The lady that took care of me most of my time was Maxine and Jim Pfefferkorn were at the Fellowship, and she was quite young, and my mother had her sit me, or governess me, or take care of me while she was busy doing other things. I remember the evenings, the formal evenings, I would really want to go, and a lot of times I had to stay home with Maxine, and Maxine had to stay home with me. And there were movies. I loved going to the movies, and sometimes I wouldn't be able to even go to the movies or do all that stuff, and I knew Leslie and Brian were doing it. And, so I felt like I was missing out. My brother would come back and tease me, but, well, so-and-so is there, and they're asking about you, and he knew that I liked that person, and so he'd just kind of do that stuff. But
Well, you weren't able to go because of your health? Or
No,
your age?
they
Or
just didn't. Yeah, they felt like I needed to stay home because I was too young, or in the way, or whatever it was.
Mm.
You know. Nowadays, what I do is with my child, who's probably about the same age that I was at the time, is I take him and I leave early, and that's what a lot of the parents do. Back in those days, Minerva tells me that they would have a group mom for the week or the weekend, and they would that mom would babysit all the children for the weekend, and then all the other parents would be able to attend the functions. Now I think that we tend to take the children along. Of course, we don't have the rights here to set the decorum was a lot different. It was a lot more formal. There was a lot more perfectionism. I think everything had to be kind of perfect, and now we're a little more relaxed, I think, and spontaneous maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
Save that for later. What about, I mean, do you remember any interaction with Mr. Wright?
I remember Mr. Wright being very much to me, in a supervisory capacity. I remember him walking through the drafting room and looking at drawings and talking to the people that were doing drawings. I remember him walking through construction sites and pointing with his cane, as is in many videotapes. Again, supervising construction and saying this works, this doesn't work, and do that and fix that. I think in the drafting room sometimes when he was around, if he would stop at somebody's desk, people would gather around. But I also remember people coming to him with drawings and putting them in front of him and just maybe getting the concept right, or I'm not exactly sure exactly what they were doing, but I know that it was definitely a teacher-student situation. He was the master, they were the apprentice.
But what about between you two? I mean, was there any kind of warmth or anything?
My mother tells me that there was a relationship there. I don't remember it that much, except that I do remember sitting on his lap many times and being around in gatherings like the box drawing, or in concerts in the living room. When there'd be what is it when there's four pieces?
Quartet.
Quartet, or some small group playing in the living room. I remember sitting at the feet of Mr. and Mrs. Wright on the floor as some of the children would just gather around on the floor, kind of scoot around a little bit. I don't remember particularly having conversations with him. I'm much more was dealt with Mrs. Wright as far as relationship went, because she took it upon herself to immediately supervise all relationships at Taliesin as far as I was concerned. I mean, she knew about what was going on with all the adults and all the children, and she would have us come in and she would talk to us directly, whether it was within a group or whether it was separately and individually. I seemed to always be getting into trouble because we had so much free time. There was always something to get into. I remember once we found barrels of apples, and we thought it was great fun to throw them against the wall of the garage and smash them. Mrs. Wright came and just absolutely had a fit and called all the parents of all the kids that were there. And unfortunately, it wasn't just me. It was Brian and Leslie and myself and whoever was around at the time. I think there were some kids called Bex, Brex, something like that. Anyway, that were there for the summer. And we definitely got in deep kimchi for that. So she was much more around taking care of what was going on in everyday life for everybody there than Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright seemed to be more segregated and living his own life. Although, like I said, I would be with him in group situations, but I really don't remember even having a conversation with him. But I'm sure I did, because I've got living proof in the pictures that that we were together fairly often.
So, but as you grew older, I mean, say if you saw Mr. Wright from a distance, what would your reaction be?
That's a good question. You see, I guess what I need to indicate is that my parents had a great reverence for the Wrights, and to them and to a lot of people that were here, this was the king and queen, and we were the courtesans, if you will. And there was such reverence that I took a different attitude, and I felt like all of us children took a different attitude of non-reverence. We didn't really buy into this whole thing that this was the king and queen, the god and goddess, whatever you want to say, the answer to everything. So I think that where my parents might have had a deferential attitude towards the Wrights, we tended to be a little more casual and about it, and we didn't get into kowtowing or I don't ever remember feeling that these were great people. I mean, I felt like Mr. Wright was a great architect,
But like you weren't afraid or
personally, no. Mrs. Wright was much more fearsome. She was much more intimidating. Mr. Wright, well, I suppose I was a little intimidated by Mr. Wright too as a child, just because there was confusion in my mind to exactly how to approach these people and live with them. So I don't think that I ever had a particular pattern of reaction, because I was always growing, learning, trying to figure out what was going on.
What about Brandock though? Was his attitude irreverent?
Brandock, I don't know. Do you remember anything about you? You were closer in age.
No, I mean I don't, since I wasn't really growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wondered, when you said that as the grandson, if he was maybe had a sort of different
I think
feeling.
that he bought into it a little bit more, because he was a grandson, and because he was directly under the wing of Mrs. Wright since the time his mother died, that I feel like I remember that we would play and kid around about what was going on and mock it a little bit, just for our own levity and our own sanity to be able to do that. Because sometimes everything was just taken so seriously. Unfortunately, my father had a great sense of humor, and he would joke around about stuff too, and that helped a lot. I'm just trying to remember if I really remember dealing with Mrs. Wright and not Mr. Wright a whole lot.
Well, that's okay. Why don't we go into some of the experiences with her?
Well, she would have us in the living room in Wisconsin gather together maybe once a week and report what had gone on during the week and what we had done and what we hadn't
Just
done.
children and a whole fellowship?
No, just children.
Uh-huh.
There were maybe 7 or 8 of us, because there was always inflowing children of families that were either visiting or in passing through for a short amount of time. So one of the things that I found difficult to deal with as a child was that she would ask us to tell on each other, and if we didn't, we would just volunteer the information, and she would say, well, Leslie, what did Celeste do that wasn't right this week, and then get this whole thing going, and it seems like that was part of the way for, the adults, it was encouraged with the adults as well. It was kind of like a convoluted way of keeping tabs of what was going on that I didn't care for. But on the other hand, the things that were good was that, first of all, we were all together, which was great, and Mrs. Wright would often take us in the Surrey, and we'd drive through the country. And the big treat of the year, of course, was getting our $5. We'd each get $5, and we would go to the local five and dime store in Spring Green, Wisconsin. We all got to spend $5 each and buy whatever we wanted, and that was a great treat.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all go in the car and we'd sing songs into Spring Green. Back then it took a little longer because there was no bridge. And the parties, the parties that Francis did were quite amazing. Birthday parties and children's parties that we would do were always a lot of fun. And I think that if I weigh it now in retrospect, that even though 10 years ago I would tell you that, or 20 years ago, I would say it was more negative than positive. Now I think it's more positive than negative. I think that all families have trouble dealing with child rearing and being loving. And so therefore it wasn't really Taliesin's fault or the Wrights' fault or anybody else's fault. It's just the way it was. And so I think now I feel that it's a special place probably to grow up and be in this environment.
So is this why you didn't feel worried about bringing Nathan back into this?
Yeah. And so I felt comfortable bringing my son. First of all, I already knew that he had a fairly secure emotional database, if you will. And so he hit Taliesin flying. I mean, he just took off, and he's very independent, and he's comfortable roaming the grounds. And I'm comfortable leaving him while I work, because he'll self-entertain, or he'll go visit his grandmother, or he'll go and do these things, but he already is comfortable with himself. He doesn't have to deal with that insecurity that I had and that some of the other kids had when they were growing up here. So, yeah, and it's interesting that in your 40s you can come back and adjust. It's a readjustment because you're not going to repeat what happened before, and it's a different place because the rights aren't here. If they were still here, I don't know that I would be here, but the filtering system of what they created has, as life changes, Taliesin's changed, and because it's a little less formal and a little more it's changed with the times, and put it that way. And because it's done that, I feel comfortable being here.
But at the same time, you said that in the year you've been here, you could understand better because of the pressures.
The pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I do understand the pressure now a lot more because, well, first of all, I'm a lot older, but I can see where I get caught up doing. I'm trying to do 20 things at one time, and then I need to go home and take care of Nathan. It's difficult to do all that stuff simultaneously. So I can understand and get a perspective that I didn't have at that time. But I tend to sit down and explain to Nathan what's going on. Nothing was explained to me. You just figure it out yourself and survive, kind of thing.
What about when your parents were divorced? Was that pretty
that was a
hard
great
to
relief.
understand for you?
No, it was a great relief because they fought a great deal, and they both drank, and they both had affairs. I mean, affairs, it was kind of like there was a square dancer here that would say, do-si-do, change your partners. And people change their partners fairly often here, from what I could see as a child. So again, it wasn't my parents; it was the group dynamics going on. So when my parents divorced, I was 10, and I was really ready for them to take off and do their own thing.
But did you side with one or another of them, particularly?
Yes, I always sided with my father. In fact, I was his caretaker. I mean, I took care of him probably as much as he took care of me, because my mother tended to be the dominant person in the relationship and was very violent. She's not anymore, and again, there's no blame now, but at the time, the dynamics of that relationship was that she would attack my father, and so I just had to stand up for Dad and take care of him. And also then he broke his back. The dog, Mrs. Wright's dog, came running through the orchard as they were walking down and flipped him over and broke his back. And then from there it went steadily downhill. His health did.
I didn't know that.
And he ended up in a wheelchair. And they weren't sure whether it was because of that accident or whether it was genetic. But at any rate.
What was the final diagnosis of his condition?
Well, the diagnosis was that his vein in his back went from a size like this, which is normal through the spinal cord, to huge in the very base of his back, and it just cut off the nerve and muscle structure that went to his legs and paralyzed him. But it took years for that to happen. So, but they still don't know the cause. I'm sure my feeling was that the broken back and non-care. I mean, he basically stayed in his room and didn't get care for this condition for years. And I remember going in and rubbing his back with Bengay, and just basically I took care of him. Tall was kind of off. He was older, so he was off into school and doing other things. And I wasn't around all the time to do that, but that's what I did. As a child, I took care of Dad, and I was very upset with my mother for treating him so poorly. Now, again, by coming back, we've been able to talk about all these things and kind of work them out. So I don't hold any feelings about that stuff anymore.
But and also now that you have matured, did you ever get into the Gurdjieff philosophy or Mrs. Wright's philosophy?
Yes, I've read Gurdjieff, and I've read Ouspensky, and I've read Mrs. Wright. I think that what I got on my own was the concept of reincarnation. I mean, I didn't get it completely on my own, it was here, but I went away, and when I did some counseling in California, I read a lot of metaphysical books, and I got into the concepts of reincarnation and karma, and the responsibility, if you will, of our lives that we take upon ourselves, and therefore there's no blame or responsibility to anybody else. And the choosing, for instance, of our parents, and choosing of our environment, and choosing of our lessons, and our choosing of our mates, and all that stuff's done before we enter. I mean, it's one of the concepts that's out there, schools of thought, if you will. And when I did all this research and looked into all this stuff and came back here, I discovered that a lot of that stuff had already been discussed by people like Gurdjieff and Mrs. Wright and Ouspensky. And I think that even though my mother wanted me to read a lot of that stuff when I was younger, that you need to have a certain perspective and certainly a certain attitude to be able to go in and read that stuff and get anything out of it. You have to be at a level to understand it.
Do you think your mother benefited or did not benefit from her relationship to Mrs. Wright?
I think definitely. I think that it became a mother-daughter thing for them, and she in fact she would tell me that Mrs. Wright was my grandmother in that regard. You know, this is our adopted family. This is my mother, and she's your grandmother. And no, I think that I can't imagine my mother doing anything else but what she did, and I can't, and I'm sure she couldn't imagine what her life would be had she not done this. Some housefrau somewhere in the Midwest, it would just been a totally different reality. And I don't think that her creativity or any of the things that have come out since she's been here would have developed. I think it was a very hard life because there was constant criticism. That criticism went throughout that I could see on both sides. Mr. Wright would be critical of the things going on in the directing room, and Mrs. Wright was critical of things going on in private lives and development. She was into inner development, and if Mom was not able to see something, she pointed out to her, and a lot of times that was very painful for her. I remember seeing her often coming home in tears and not really quite understanding until I got a little bit older why she would be in tears. But I think that the way that my mother looks at it is this was her growth. This is the way she grew. And we're all into inner growth now. A lot of people are aware of it, and that we need to develop on those levels as human beings. And this was a school to do that. It was a school of architecture, but it was certainly much more than that, philosophically.
Did you ever meet your mother's parents?
I knew my grandfather. I never met my grandmother. She was always in Switzerland, and they had divorced before I came along. And so I knew my step-grandmother, Viva, and my grandfather's name was Heinrich Schneider. And they lived in Colorado at the time that I was going to school there, so they would come and pick me up on weekends, and I would spend occasional weekends, maybe once a month or so, up in the mountains with them. They liked the mountains because they reminded them of Switzerland. Well, I was going to say something, but I've forgotten what it is. So
Just what
carry on.
were they? What were they like? I mean, those
Oh,
grandparents.
my grandfather was very interesting. He was an inventor, invented the automatic transmission, and invented submarine parts and did all that kind of stuff. So he traveled around the world, and he's like a twin to Kurt Jurgens. If you know Kurt Jurgens, the actor, he talked like him and looked like him, and same voice, same demeanor, everything. And my grandmother was very sweet. Her name was Viva. Again, they were alcoholic, so there was just different levels of things going on that were hard for a young child to understand why people were so unhappy all the time.
Well, did they approve of Taliesin though? They had kind of brought your mother there in the first place when she was only 14.
I think they did. Yeah, I think that they did. On my father's side, they were very disapproving. In other words, they were very upset to lose him, because basically people that came here became part of this family, and a lot of them left their other families. Now, I mean, my parents visited the family, and I mean, I've got lots of pictures of everybody together, but on the other hand, the loyalties all were shifted to here. And I think that was bewildering, probably. Not that they would use that word or that concept, but they just went, did we just lose our son, or what happened? Because it really takes over your life.
What was your father's family? Who were they?
My father's family was Davisons, and they lived in Pittsburgh. They had some money and position, and those things were important to them.
From what work, do you know? What brought the money and position?
Well, they were associated with a lot of things. They had factories and warehouses, and one of the people in the family was married to George Westinghouse, and there was Alcoa Aluminum, and there was a Coke factory, and there was a lot of factories, industries, business. One grandfather was on the board of Gulf Oil for 25 years. I think he was the CEO. So there was just a lot of business things, and then there was an attachment to the Mellon Bank and so on. And then the family moved down to Florida. My grandmother moved to Florida, and so when my father was becoming handicapped and going into this wheelchair business, we spent years down there in Florida. I ended up going to high school in Florida.
So what years were those? Can you remember the date?
63. We went down in 63, and I think my father then went to the Mayo Clinic. He spent about a year down there, and then he went to the Mayo Clinic, and then he was gone 2 or 3 years. I don't know exactly. I'd have to ask my mom. But and then he came back to the fellowship. And in the meantime, my mother married John Rattenberry. But they developed a friendship, and they were able to coexist here, as many couples had changed partners and coexisted here, and they did it too. And then I stayed in Florida until about 1970, and then I moved to Hawaii. I went to college in Hawaii, and then I came back to Arizona in 1972, and that's when I regrouped with the fellowship. I didn't stay here, but I got together with my father, and I'm very glad that I did. It was his last 3 years of his life, and some cosmic forces got me to come here, because otherwise I probably would never have done it, and I would have missed that, and I'm glad I didn't.
So that was an especially close time when you came back that time?
Mm-hmm. And he died in his apartment, which is now your mother's apartment, Cornelius, in December 1974, and Johnny Hill was with him the night that he died, and I believe that Mrs. Wright and my mother were there also. Not when he died, but that night. So, and I think he was working in the drafting room until right at the end.
And now, just for the camera's sake, I'd like you to tell what you're doing, what you have been doing, and why you did come back here.
Okay. My father did the night renderings for Mr. Wright. He pretty much invented the technique, perfected the technique, and did it all the night renderings. And that always intrigued me, even as a 3-year-old. I would watch him do these night renderings, and I just thought they were amazing. And apparently, lots of people thought they were amazing. And I knew that he had done, maybe 11 or 12 original homes that in the group collective, almost all the work was a Frank Lloyd Wright original, and then there would be renderings that were done by the apprentices, or eventually they became associate architects. And so I have a list of all the renderings that my father did that I want to put into a book, and then his original drawings, and then there are box projects galore. Thanks to Indra putting me in touch with all those. And then there are the photography. My dad was one of the early photographers here, and if I can find the photographs, I will put them in the book too. They're all missing, but hopefully we'll find them.
Were they of people and of landscapes and
They
of everything?
were. He did architectural photography. He did people, and there's a lot of black and white originals from the early fellowship, which I would just love to find.
Mm.
But in the meantime, I'm going to gather, there are a lot of photographs with him in them, and with Mr. Wright groups, and doing box projects and all that kind of stuff. And so as I gather those, I'll put those in too. So I'm doing a book called Davy's Drawings, and I just don't think I'm going to finish it, and I think I'm going to have to come back.
Well, are there any of your father's relatives still that you're still in contact with?
Oh,
In
yes.
Pittsburgh or somewhere?
There were 7 children originally, and now there are 2 living, 1 brother and 1 sister, and there are 23 cousins, and I don't know, innumerable cousins below that level, probably twice as many or 3 times as many. Those people I'm going to try to keep in contact with, although it's been years since I've seen any Davisons, but I'm going to rectify that. But yes, Uncle Billy had a house designed by my dad. It was a cabin in the mountains in Tennessee. It's probably one of the ones that I'm not going to go photograph, but I do have the plans. And then there's another thing, is that plans are missing. It's like Sorensen House, all the original presentation drawings are gone.
Hmm.
So some people say, well, they were probably stolen. Other people think they're misfiled, and some people think the clients might have them. We don't know. So it's mysterious disappearances that happen here.
Yeah. And elsewhere.
And elsewhere.
But you might start with the clients, because that's usually what does happen to them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they think they own them and they keep them. Well, I was wondering, would you be willing to talk a little bit about Tom?
Mm-hmm. Tall had probably, because he was here all the time, a harder time of emotionally dealing with all the things that were going on here, and the lack of attention and the lack of affection, and just again, being in the middle of the pressure cooker. So, as an adult, if you can call it an adult, when we got together in Florida, we were both in our 20s. No, I couldn't have been in my 20s. Well, I was in my late teens. And we partied a lot, and we got to know each other, but I could see that he was very unhappy. And he got into, he liked taking pills, downers, uppers, anything. And we both drank a lot, partied a lot, and had a lot of fun. But every once in a while he'd take an overdose, and a major overdose. And I would call up my parents, and I would say, look, you need to come and take care of him. But they couldn't, and they wouldn't, whatever. And so finally, when I moved to Hawaii, my brother moved to Arizona, and he stayed in a house that belonged to a former apprentice named Ladon Benoit. And, there were cries for help, and every time he tried to commit suicide, I felt like they were cries for help. But there was a lack of responsibility on the part of both parents, and Mrs. Wright, I think, she took a hand in what was going on, and she felt partly responsible on a certain level, but I felt like there was a certain irresponsibility in the sense that when he was so sick, they just rejected him. They said, "Stay out of here and don't come back." And my mother talks about that now with great regret that they did that. She kind of understands now that was detrimental to his health. But I could tell a long time before that he was not going to make it. I just knew it. And he didn't. So he finally committed suicide about 1971, maybe, in Tempe, Arizona. And it was very devastating to my parents. I don't think they ever will get over it until they work it out at some other level. And Tall, he had a very good sense of humor, and but he was lost. He was a lost child, lost soul.
Did he ever really plan to be, did he have any particular bent in any direction that he wanted to become?
He really wanted to be. His dream was to become a movie director. And in fact, he dated Anna Bogdanovich, who's Peter Bogdanovich's sister, and I think that was partly a connection for him. And he worked with a man in England. He spent a lot of time in England. He was married to an English gal and had 2 sons, and who are now adult, and one of them has a son. So the genes carry on, at least. But he worked with a set director in England and spent time doing that sort of thing, just trying to learn the trade and kind of get into it. But there wasn't enough stamina, and certainly not enough strength, to stay in that kind of business. I mean, talk about a pressure cooker. Hollywood is extreme pressure, as far as I'm concerned. What I can tell, what goes on in the movie business, everything has to be perfect, and it is a lot of pressure, and a lot of expense, and a lot of perseverance, and hang in there kind of stuff. Steven Spielberg kind of personality where you can take the guff and still stay there. My brother didn't have that. He was too sensitive and too I don't think either one of us had a lot of perseverance and long-term responsibility to stick with something. And I see that it's generational also. There was a lot of people that talk about that was in the generation, and they still complain about that. So I don't think it was necessarily Tall or myself or Taliesin that imbued us with that. It was part of growing up and being in the 60s, and whatever happened to this generation, we were part of it. So again, there's no blame, it just happened. And it was just, Tall just had aspirations, and he had artistic talent to a certain degree, but it was very difficult for him to stay with anything for any great length of time, so he would move from one thing to another, and even when he was in Florida, he would change jobs every 6 months. Something else would happen, like quit a job and then go on to something else.
So you'd try to advise him, but it probably just didn't.
Yeah, I tried to tell him that he had to kind of clean up his act a little bit, and that he needed to stop with this imbibing in these things that were so damaging to him. But he was in too much pain. It was a painkiller. It was too uncomfortable for him to live in this life. I just don't. I see other people that have that bent also, and I can usually just tell now by if somebody gives me a little bit of their history, I can perceive that they have that potential of taking that same route. Because, you just get a certain feeling about yourself when you're in that way.
Well, I'm glad to know that you are very much into health foods and things like this, and seem to be living a very healthy life.
Yeah, It is. It's better with knowledge. I mean, the research, both in child rearing and in health aspects, and in adult emotional adult behavior. You know, there's just been so much information now that's out there that allows us to get in touch with ourselves. I think that's what we need to do mostly. Find out what we can do to live a fuller, healthier life that includes growth, inner growth, and I don't know. I mean, we need to be happier more than sad and upset and depressed and all that stuff. And we need to feel like we're living the life that we're supposed to be living, and not the opposite, which is what most people that are out there in the corporate world and in business and so on and so forth would just as soon not get up and go to work in the morning and go deal with the life that they have to live.
Well, how do you feel about the fellowship today?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I think there's a lot of levels of things going on. I think there's a dichotomy. I mean, a lot of people have talked about that between that did not exist in the old days. Everybody was the same age, basically. Now you've got the senior staff and the apprentices, and you've got this huge several generations between them. And so what I see is I see people here that are apprentices that pick up on what's going on here and the energy and all the good things that are happening, and they dive into it. And then I see people who have an attitude about it that's very negative, that they think there's nothing going on here. They don't pick up on anything, and they just want to do their time and get out. And there's a small group that's that way, and then there's another group that enjoys being here and what's going on. And I think that the seniors that are still here all seem to be fairly healthy and living good lives and enjoying being here and what they're doing. And they seem to be happy with the choice that they've made to stay here. I think that the energy and the creativity is still here if you want to pick up on that. And again, some of us have discussed the fact that some people are just absolutely blind to what's going on here. They're not getting it. And there is a lot going on. I mean, I can walk through the drafting room and there'll be a project going in just the electricity that goes through with the dynamics of getting something done and getting it into a client's office and getting the presentation papers done and da-da-da-da. You know, I mean, that's all very interesting. And then you've got everybody's lives that you can get involved with, and you've got all these relationships going on, and then you've got all the work that needs to be done, the things that need to be done to have community life carry on on a day-to-day basis are the treadmills, if you will, that keep it all going. And all that stuff's very interesting too. I mean, I find the dynamics of human relationships and coexistence encapsulated here. And you can study it and look at it and observe it, and it's very, very interesting. And I'm really enjoying being here. I don't know how the hell I'm going to leave, because my mom and I are having fits trying to figure out how to work it out so that I can keep Nathan's father happy and keep us happy at the same time. And I just don't know how I'm going to do it other than cutting myself in quarters. Just kidding.
Well, this has been very good, Taliesin. Let's do some more another time.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're continuing now because we do want to ask about Gene Masselink, and Celeste has some memories of him.
Yes. I remember Gene as being very gentle, loving. Probably he was my favorite person here, because I just felt that he was loving and sweet and tender and kind-hearted, extremely creative. Even as a child, I picked up on his creativity. The things that he did, the mosaics and the designs and everything were just so beautiful that even as children, all of us, I think, were aware of Gene's creativity and his sensitivity and his beauty of his soul. I mean, it was just, he was an amazing person. And I think that he was probably one of the gems of Taliesin, as far as I'm concerned. one of the higher levels. Is about, I'm sure he had his problems, but I never saw them. I never saw him unhappy. I never saw him complain. I never saw him bitch and moan the way some people did. I never saw him get into any argument with any person. I mean, he just always seemed to be a sweetheart. And he was always gentle, and he was always kind to us. I mean, my mother was very close to Gene, and so I always considered him as an uncle, in that sense that he was related to us. I mean, and he got along great with my dad, and I just felt he was part of my family.
Celeste, what age were you that you remember these
Well,
relations?
I think that he died, in 1962?
62 he died.
Yes. So I was a teenager when he died. So I was quite young. Do you know what year he came here? He was here before?
1933.
Yeah,
So he was
okay,
here
so
when you were
he
born.
was way here when I was born.
How did he relate to you and to other children?
Well, he would talk to us. I mean, he related to us
No
probably...
problem approaching him,
No,
going to
no.
his room, anything?
No. In fact, I think he related to us more than many other adults did. He would talk to all of his children, and just did day-to-day stuff, just as you pass,
Right.
in passing.
Did his humor ever approach you?
Oh yes, I definitely got his humor. In fact, we were aware, even as children, that there was this thing going on between Gene and Wes, that they would play tricks on each other. And in fact, John R. told me this story the other day about that Gene and Wes hadn't done anything to each other in quite some time, and it was time to instigate something. And so John R. and Davy picked up, they tricked. They did something to Wes that was just terrible, something in his apartment. And then they did something to Gene that was just absolutely terrible. And they made it look like each Wes and Gene had done it to each other. And so therefore, Wes and Gene were at each other for the whole rest of the summer. And Davy and John R. were going around just giggling and laughing every time they played trick on each other, because they had finally got them back in the groove again, and things were not dull around here anymore. At least for that summer, or whatever year it was. So I do know that, and I remember hearing a story of Gene and Wes in the car, and I believe Gene was driving, and the car stopped. And Gene goes, "My God, what happened to the car?" And Wes gets out, and they look at the engine, and they look at the tires, and they try to figure out what's going on, and then finally Wes hands Gene the keys, and he'd just literally gone over and pulled the keys out of the car. So anyway, yeah, there was a lot of that going on, and in a way I kind of missed that we don't do a whole lot of that stuff now.
I do remember your father entered into quite a few
Yes.
of those practical jokes,
Yes.
and sometimes skits also.
Yes, and there were the skits, and then there were the practical jokes that went on, and it really was, they were kind of the three who seemed to do it the most that I can remember was Davy, Gene, and Wes. It almost reminds me of a fraternity thing. They had their little fraternity, and they were practical jokers, and then they would get other people. They would group and sometimes do it on other people, which was always funny too. So, but yeah, Gene.
Well, I think you've touched on two important elements of Gene, other than his outstanding artistry, the human aspect of Gene and the humor, which were
yes.
so interlocked and
Yes.
brought you into him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did he
and,
give you presents
Um,
or candy or anything?
yes, I'm sure he did. I sort of remember his essence more than anything else, and that really impressed me, because he and Shirley, I remember Shirley being that way too,
Mhm.
a lot. And they both left so early. It's interesting that they died so young, and seemed so early to me. But they were the sweethearts. They were the ones I felt that were the most tender-hearted of the group, and most sensitive to what was going on. And nobody ever came. I never saw anybody come down on them either. They didn't seem to get into too much trouble like some people did.
We don't know about it.
But we don't know. Yeah. As a child, I wouldn't have known anyway. but certainly. And he came to visit us in Hawaii. He came with Mrs. Wright, and Jean and Wes came and stayed. Well, they didn't stay with us, of course, but they were in Hawaii for a visit, for a vacation. And oh, I remember. Jean laid out in the sun, and he got a terrible sunburn. I mean, his whole back was like a lobster. It was just awful. And my mother knew about aloe vera. And of course in Hawaii it grows there, and that's where they pretty much invented aloe vera for, and I remember her peeling it down and laying it all over his back, and he would just be groaning from the pain of this terrible sunburn. And, but she was very diligent. She just would wipe that aloe vera on once an hour or so, and really took care of it. But, and then I remember we all went shopping, and it was fun. There was a lot of humor. Again, Jean and Wes were together, and so there was a lot of humor and jokes. The jokes that never stopped between those two. I mean, it was just constant stories and humor going on. It was really fun to be around that environment. And I consider it an honor to have known Jean. Really, I consider it an honor to have been here on a certain level that I certainly didn't appreciate it as a child that I do now. And it's interesting because my son does. He picks up on it without me necessarily saying anything. See, I think that's what happened to me. There was too much of that. It's such an honor to be here, Celeste. You should really appreciate it. Well, you don't until you get it yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it has to be an intrinsic thing inside.
Okay. Well, I'd like to ask you if you have anything more. I mean, if you don't have anything more about Jean that you can think of right now, what about Ivana? You haven't mentioned her at all.
Oh, Ivana. Yes, I remember Ivana because she and my mother were about the same age, and they pretty much hung out together. I mean, they weren't necessarily close. I think they had their close times. I always felt a little sorry for Ivana because I felt that it would be very difficult to be the heir to all of this, and the princess, if you will. In fact, I see pictures now of her when she was young, and she was so beautiful. And it was like the king and the queen and the princess, and here was this little fairy tale spot in the universe, and here we were. But I remember her being with men and mated and doing all that kind of stuff, and yet I felt that there was unhappiness there even then, and yet she was just beautiful, and there were times when she shined, and there were other times when it was obvious that she was unhappy to everybody. And then I think that as she grew older, well, I don't really know what happened. I wasn't here at the time that I hear things about Ivana and what got her into the position where she is now. I just know that my own feeling was that it was hard for her to have relationships that were meaningful because I don't think there was a lot of closeness in the family, a lot of nurturing and that kind of stuff. And it all goes back. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just keep going back to children's childhood and all that kind of stuff because that's where it all starts. And that's where you learn. And that's where you get your start in life.
But was she kind to you and the children?
She and I always got along. Now, I've heard that it wasn't necessarily true with the other children, but she and I always had a connection. And I always liked her and respected her and felt comfortable in her presence. And I still do. And I know that she comes and goes and she's on and off and so on and so forth. But I never had any problems with Ivana. I always enjoyed her company and got along with her fine. I think we had our own connection, and then we had this connection through my mom. And my mom told me that I used to go out when I was 5 years old and say, by the way, I hear or I noticed that you're with so-and-so. And I would call her on these relationships that she had. And my mom said, well, you should have slapped her or something. And Ivana said, oh no, it's all right because it's true. And she was nice about it, She wasn't being mean or anything. She just was observing it, So my mom said, you got that at a very early age to figure out who was with who. And so on. And I mean, that's the only thing that she's told me about my relationship with Yvonne, although I remember going up and visiting her in the Sun Cottage and talking with her and being in her company. And she seemed, sometimes she would be very regal and detached, and other times she was down to earth and would be, communicate with us and with me. And there was a relationship there.
Did you ever see the dances?
Oh yes, I loved the dances. I really did. I felt like the dances were, and I believe they do have Tibetan background from Gurdjieff pulled them from that era, but I felt they were very timeless. I felt like getting back to reincarnation, that we had all done those dances on different levels in different places. So to me, the dances and the chorus were very special all my life. I've always loved chorus, and I've always loved choral music and violin music because of people like John A. Always now, and the dance. In fact, there isn't any other dance except for ballet that I like as much as what we did here. And I don't know how you all did it, because it looks so beautiful and so perfect all the time. I mean, you were one of the dancers, but and I remember Pat dancing, and I thought Pat was one of the most beautiful ladies here. I always loved Pat. Where's Pat? Is she still living?
Yes.
Yes,
I don't know where she is.
She's in Florida.
she is. Well, anyway, she was one of my favorite people too. And
The music
the music,
of
yes,
to the dances.
to the dances. Now, was that mostly Mrs. Wright's music, or was that classical music that they used, or where did that music come from?
Some of it was from the Hartman and Gurdjieff, and later on it was Mrs. Wright's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very impressed. Even
Had
as a
you heard
child.
much of Mrs. Wright's music?
Yes, but I didn't realize it was Mrs. Wright's at the time.
Later on, there was also instrumental music,
Mm-hmm.
violin sonatas,
Mhm.
trios, a
Mhm.
little ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you'd heard those or not.
I've heard it. I have heard it now. As a child, I think that the chorus and the chorus was basically mostly songs like
Well, the polyphonic things and
well, there was
westerns,
the westerns
spirituals.
by Cambios and the what was the rolling tumbling tumbleweed.
Tumble,
Mhm.
tumble.
That was one of my favorites. And my dad was in chorus, of course, so I really
Oh.
paid a lot of attention to chorus. But no, I remember the ensembles, the music, the skits, and the dance. I mean, and the movies. God, I'm a movie fanatic because of these
That's
movies.
why you like Jean.
Was Jean a movie fanatic too?
Oh yes,
Oh,
the
yeah.
Playhouse was all Jean.
Yeah. Oh, it was. Okay.
He got the movies. He projected everything.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm just a movie buff from that. I mean, she and I did nothing but go to movies all summer when nobody was here. Now we've sort of gotten out of the habit, but
We'll get back.
we'll get back into it. Yeah. As soon as everybody leaves.
Okay, we better call it a day. Thank
Okay.
you again, Celeste.
You're welcome.